Hunter Thompson wrote that Richard Nixon wanted to win the 1972 election big, and he wanted to win it bad. He was off of a 1960 thrilling defeat to John F. Kennedy that he took very hard, off of a big loss in the California governor's race in 1962. Nixon decided not to run in 64, even though he really wanted to. And then a narrow victory in 1968. Nixon was primed and ready to win the 1972 election, and he did not want to lose. And he was willing to go to degrees that most, if not all, campaigns are unwilling to go. And that was through the use of coercive, secretive, quote-unquote, dirty trick type activities spearheaded by CREEP, or the Commission to Re-elect the President. And so several of these things happened to Ed Muskie. These weird campaign events kept plaguing his campaign throughout the primary season. Before even the general election, before Muskie even had the opportunity to face Nixon in a head-to-head contest, his campaign was plagued by these kinds of events that just don't happen every day or to every campaign. For instance, there were frequent stink bombs that would go off in his office. Nixon had targeted, through CREEP, had targeted the frontrunner, the kind of Obama, the fresh blood in 1972, to destroy him during the primary season. One of the things that CREEP officials would do was that they would show up to Muskie campaign headquarters in whatever city. So if they're campaigning in New Hampshire, they would show up to the New Hampshire headquarters. In Iowa, the Iowa headquarters. You get the point. And they would say that they're just mad about Ed Muskie and they want to support the campaign in any way they can, and so they'd be hired. And then they would use that influence, use that insider influence to sabotage the campaign from the inside. So they would take pictures of typewriters that they alleged were stolen from Maine government headquarters, the Maine county government seats. And that would be leaked to the press, and so there would be negative articles. One of the things that CREEP did that became very famous, I should say two things that CREEP did to Muskie in the 1972 campaign that became very famous, are the so-called Canuck letter and the letter about Jane Muskie, Ed Muskie's wife, that ended up becoming a front page story in the Manchester Union Leader. So first, the Canuck letter. While Muskie is campaigning in Florida, a series of bizarre events keep happening. There's an ad in a Jewish newspaper in South Florida, paid for, it later turns out, by Nixon's people, that says, "Hey Muskie, why won't you consider a Jew as vice president?" Several quote-unquote reporters are following Muskie around, asking him about these bizarre incidents, haranguing him with aggressive questions about issues of race, about issues of Jewish identity, and then it becomes clear that this is their angle. And so the Manchester Union Leader gets a letter from a man whose name is quote-unquote Paul Morrison. It later becomes known as the Canuck letter because Morrison describes asking Muskie on the campaign trail in Florida, well, how can you from Maine know anything about the problems of a bigger state, a diverse state like Florida, or like lots of other states like California, since you're from a state that's relatively racially homogenous, like Maine? And so Muskie reportedly replies to this guy, Paul Morrison, well, you've never been to Maine, so you don't know how many Canucks we have up there. It's a derogatory term, Canuck, for French Canadians, and at the time French Canadians were a pretty big percentage, up to 30% of the voting electorate in Maine, and an even comparable percentage in New Hampshire, so this could be a real problem if the Canuck letter gets out and it looks at it as if the Manchester Union Leader is going to publish it as is, as a letter to the editor. And so they do. It turns out that it's written by, later on, it's written by a Nixon staffer. It's a member of CREEP who's completely fabricated this incident in order to stir up controversy about whether Muskie can be a real leader in the Democratic Party. Another way they do this is through the infiltration of campaign headquarters. One of the people who is inside the infiltration process leaks a story to the Manchester Union Leader, a conservative newspaper, that says that Jane Muskie, A, loves to have 2 martinis before dinner, which is a lot of martinis after Thanksgiving dinner. I don't know how many of you are martini fans, but 2 martinis is a lot of martinis. And second, they paint her as kind of an off-color character, somebody who loves to tell raunchy, dirty jokes. So here we have this image of a smoking, drinking, dirty joke-telling person, Jane Muskie, and it becomes clear that if this image gets out, it could be kind of a sabotaging process to the campaign because it doesn't exactly scream First Lady. And so Muskie takes it upon himself, as I'll show in just a second, to respond to these replies by having a flatbed truck drive up to the front door of the Manchester Union Leader, where he's going to give an impromptu speech that makes his campaign famous, but also infamous.